Yesterday we began looking at one of the great types or symbolic features from the Old Testament that pointed to something in the New Testament, and that was the tabernacle. Again, we're careful there because some people have overdone the typing, overdone the symbolism of the tabernacle, and have really distorted what God wanted to teach us through the tabernacle. But in the big picture, we're told in the book of Hebrews chapter 9 that the tabernacle had definite symbolism. It's a definite type pointing to Christ and who he is and what he's done, and especially what he's done, his ministry for us. Now remember, in the Holy of Holies, the high priest would go once a year, and as he went into the Holy of Holies, he would take blood, and he would bring cleansing to the people of Israel in that special once-a-year ceremony. They had sacrifices every day, year in and year out for centuries, but only once a year was this very special Day of Atonement that was the high holy day, we might say, of everything of the worship of God in the Jewish system. Now, in Hebrews chapter 9, he's talking about this. We looked at this tabernacle a bit yesterday and the Holy of Holies, but now we're going to drop down to verses 11 through 14 and see more in detail what the symbolism is all about. It says, "But when Christ," verse 11, "appeared as a high priest." So we're talking now about the high priesthood. We looked at that a couple of days ago. Christ is our high priest, not after the order of Aaron, but after the order of Melchizedek, a different order of priesthood, but a priesthood that was perfect for us, that would bring perfect salvation and cleansing. But when Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things to come, he entered through the greater and more perfect tabernacle, not this physical one that was on earth, not made with hands, that is to say, not of this creation. So the Old Testament tabernacle pointed to something that was even greater, he says. The Old Testament tabernacle was real, and it had a real purpose, but it points to something of even greater significance. Verse 12, "And not through the blood of goats and calves, but through his own blood." Now think about that. The Old Testament system was a system of sacrifices. We've looked at that type as well. And the blood of bulls and calves and so forth and goats was shed for centuries to cover up the sins of the people. But it was insignificant or insufficient. Let's put it that way. It was unable. This blood was unable, chapter 10, verses 1 to 4, to actually cleanse people of their sins. That would take the blood of Christ. And therefore, he enters through his own blood. He entered the holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption. And so his blood, the blood of Christ, once for all, shed on Calvary, would obtain our eternal redemption. The Old Testament system of wrapped around the tabernacle and the sacrifices and so forth obtained temporary redemption or perhaps a pause in the condemnation of the sinner, but it couldn't totally remove the sinful situation. It would take the blood of Christ. It says, verse 13, "For if the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer sprinkled those who had been defiled, sanctified for the cleansing of the flesh," so that's what happened in the Old Testament, "how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God." And so he says what happened in the Old Testament was important. It enabled the people to come before God, cleansed temporarily of their sins, covered by the blood of bulls and goats that could bring a temporary covering of their sins, but could not remove sins totally from the lives of these people. But it pointed to an event that would do so, and that event would be the coming of Jesus Christ himself, who would shed his blood in order to give us eternal redemption. And it says here to cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God. Our works could never give us a clear conscience. That is, cleanse us from the guilt of our sin. It never could. Our works aren't able to do that. Our sacrifices aren't able to do that. The tabernacle, the Old Testament high priesthood could not do that. But Jesus Christ did, so that we can now serve the living God. The living God is a very favorite terminology in the book of Hebrews. We have a living God, not an idol, not a dead God, not a distant God, but a living God, and we can serve him, but only serve him because of the work of Jesus Christ on our behalf. So the Old Testament system pointed to that which would be even more wonderful and greater, that which would be perfect, the sacrifice of Jesus Christ for us.